scaling your business in today's environment is very challenging, let alone trying to scale your business to put you in a position to exit or sell your business. And then there's a third situation when you're scaling your business or growing your business. It's putting yourself in a position to hand this off to the next generation in your family, a succession, so to speak. And succession planning is so important, but very rarely discussed. I don't hear it spoken about at conferences or discussed on podcasts or in articles or business journals. But today I have Jonathan Goldhill, who is a scalability expert. And more importantly, over the last 30 years, he's helped thousands of family-owned businesses, mid-sized businesses plan the succession and put them in a position to be successful in this transition. Now, we talk about the succession planning, but more importantly, we focus a lot on leadership, training, development, targeting who that next person is. And then lastly, we talk about empathy. Empathy for the person who's leaving the business, as well as the person who's receiving the business. It was a fascinating discussion. Jonathan is so passionate about this, but he talks in very tactical terms as well to help you, if you're in this position or thinking about it, to make sure that in the future, you're planning accordingly as well. So let's dive into today's episode of You're in Charge, Conversations that Spark Change with Jonathan Goldhill about succession planning and scaling your business. So Jonathan, I'm really excited about having you on, and your book, The Disruptive Successor, was fascinating. I started reading it and I couldn't wait to get in front of you to chat with you about it. So let's just dive in on this whole concept of succession planning for business leaders. I don't think it's a topic that's discussed very often. I mean, I'm constantly reading books, I'm listening to podcasts about businesses, I'm reading blogs and articles, and very rarely, almost non-existent, is this conversation of succession planning. So for the audience who may not understand exactly what we're talking about, can you just, when the words succession planning come up, what does that mean?
It's planning for the next generation of leadership, whether that's inside the family or outside the family, to take over and run the business. Alternatively, it could be just developing your exit plan. But I think of exit planning, Glenn, and succession planning as two different things. I think of exit planning as the intention of exiting the company, and that's a sales situation. But succession planning is staying involved in the ownership of the company, but transferring it to a new generation of leaders and possibly owners. And they may be inside the family or out.
So pushing back, just answering that, there are some times when you do sell a business, that they part of your exit strategy is you still have to stay around and work for a year or two. But what you're talking about is, when I started reading this, it's more about I'm passing this on to my children or family members or a combination thereof, but I'm still here. It's not as if I want to get rid of it. I'm just handing it off and putting it in safe hands. Is that?
That's the focus of the market that I went after, but I think I appreciate your pushback, and I think it's a good one, because there are times when someone exits a company. I had a client 2 years ago who I coached for only 6 months, but we continued a conversation for the next 9 months thereafter, where he was going through working with the business intermediary, and then they transitioned to a sale. And I get a call from him every 3 months, and he's complaining about this, that, or the other thing with, his payment or the commissions or the deal or the time, and so I never really thought about that as requiring some succession planning. But if you think about it, an owner who's exiting the business, and most owners who exit a business, especially service businesses, are going to have to stick around for some time, because too much of the revenue is maybe dependent upon them, and the new buyer doesn't want things to fall apart. So you might as well talk about, what does the passing of the baton look like? what skills am I going to develop in you as the new leader when we transfer? What things am I going to remove myself from? I mean, what does that leader or master apprenticeship transfer process look like? And I'm not aware that owners who exit businesses really have that conversation about what succession looks like with a new outside person. The only capacity that I'm really familiar with those conversations happen. And so it's a good case point for these conversations should be happening
Right.
in the transfer, in a sale. Hey, let's talk about what it's going to look like when I hand you the keys and I'm still coming to work. Let's
Right.
talk about that, because that might be that might not be something that I want to live with or I'm comfortable with.
Right. Well, that has to be mapped out. I think that's
Yeah.
a great point. And, why I thought this is a relevant topic is I'm seeing that. I work in the automotive vertical with marketing, but we're seeing
Right.
a lot of mergers and acquisitions where companies that people I've known for years, their company has been purchased. And that's always been my thought is, well, what happens afterwards? If you're merged into a business and maybe the cultures are different, and how does that work? And how long does someone stay around before either they're told they're leaving or they choose to leave? Or, I think your point is really important, is what is my responsibility? More importantly, what's my authority still? Because I'm probably used to calling the shots, and now maybe I don't call the shots, and I have to understand that.
And that's a really good point, because that's where the rub is. And in the particular case of the client that I'm referring to, that's where usually his frustration lies when he calls me up and says, this is not how I do things. Like, they do things this way. I don't do things that way. And I would suppose, I'm assuming that those succession conversations are very much glossed over by the intermediary, be it a business broker or a more high level intermediary, because those are just going to be sticking points that are going to make the deal go south. Let's
Right.
not focus on these like emotional authority type dynamics. Let's just talk about more the nuts and bolts of the deal and the valuation and the
Right.
terms and the conditions. We don't want to get into this type of stuff. I'll just maybe this is a bad analogy, but I once went to buy a house and
Right.
we bought all the furnishings in the house. That was how it was sold.
Right.
And the owners wanted us to take ownership of their German Shepherd. And we get to the escrow meeting. We were like, that's great. We love your German Shepherd. We would be happy to, you're moving into an apartment,
Right.
no problem. We get to the escrow company, and that was the first curveball. They sat down and said, hey, we need to take the German Shepherd out of this deal, because that could make this whole thing go south. And we can't have that kind of an element in it,
Right.
And I think the analogy maybe is fitting. It's like when you start talking about what's our relationship. I don't even know you, by the way, right? And you're
Right.
going to come in and you're going to run my company, and you're buying and paying me this multiple. And now we're going to talk about what our relationship looks like after the deal is done. I mean,
Right.
Well,
and that's a very, I don't think people talk about that enough.
no,
And
they
maybe
don't.
they do. I've never been, my companies have never been at the table where someone's saying, hey, we're going to purchase you. We did have one software that we did sell, but part of the team went with them. And, so it was in good hands because we knew who was there. But that was, we want to buy a product and take it, versus I'm going with it and I'm going to be with you. And I think, to your point, is most entrepreneurs, when you're building your business, look at it as family, a child. You're worried about your staff, what's going to happen to them. You've grown a business for multiple years, where you've got to know your team and their families, and now all of a sudden they're going to work for someone else, or someone else is coming in, and well, what happens if they fire them? And now, or I have no authority, or to your point earlier, you completely are running the business in a different manner than I am. But most people are focused on the multiple, and they're
Yeah.
focused on the
And,
money.
and I
Versus,
think they're also focused on the people that are going to be there long term.
right.
I don't like I'm aware of those conversations. Look, I've got Joe. He's been my GM. He's been here for 20 years. He's going to be invaluable to you. And I want to know, I promised him he's going to be protected if and when I exit this business. He knows
Right.
I'm 20 years older than him. And I promised him he'd be protected. So I need to know what that looks like. And I'm going to have an employment contract for Joe. But we don't talk about me as the seller and what my relationship is going to be. Look, because I'm out of here in 6 months. And the sooner you
But
get me out of here, the
but do
better.
you think people do that? You're involved in this more, and that's why I'm
I
just
don't.
curious. Do
I don't
people,
think they, I think
not
they
not
talk
not
about
for
their
them, I
employees.
mean for their
No,
teams, for
yes,
their team?
I hear that often.
Okay.
I don't actually know how the deals go down because I don't, there's only been a few that I've stayed involved with because I'm
Right.
mostly a scale up and growth coach.
Right.
And I have a really good partnership or strategic alliance with someone who I think it does a really good job on selling businesses,
Mhm.
but I don't, and I know I'll hear the conversations about I want to take care of my GM, or I want to take care of this group of people, or I want to know my workers, I mean, a lot of times people are buying a business because they need the bench strength. And
Right.
so they're buying that bench, and there might be one bad apple or two, and they're going to get rid of those. And the owner wasn't willing to do it because they were sacred cows or whatever,
Exactly.
But I, I think that those conversations are happening. How detailed they are, whether employment contracts are put together for that, for those incumbent employees, I'm not really sure.
So then let's walk through this a little bit
Mhm.
because I'm fascinated. So when someone brings you aboard
Mhm.
and they're working with you and they're saying, okay, great, I need your help. Let's
Right.
go down the road of I want to, whether I'm selling it or I'm handing it off, it's my role is going to change.
Yep.
So we're sitting there. Walk me through some of the discussion points that people have to think about. So if someone's listening to this, tactically, they're going, oh, that's a good point. So give me
Right.
two or three or four things that you say, okay, here's our starting point. These are major discussion points we have to have before we can move forward.
Right. So I'm probably unique in this area of succession planning
Mhm.
because I fashion myself as a coach to next generation leaders. So, and I'm pretty discriminatory about who I take on as a client. So I'm really, and that's why my book, Disruptive Successor, is written for that next gen leader. So Glenn, I'm looking keenly is there a family member or a next gen leader who looks like they could be the CEO and could run this company? Because that's the one who I really want to coach and become my client. So,
Okay.
so
So before we move forward, just
yep,
again, because it just clicked to me. So if
mhm.
I'm the one coming to you and saying,
You're a baby boomer,
I
let's
want to
say.
move, I want to move the business, or I want to get ready to succession plan,
Right.
you're not so worried about me. You can work with me, but what you're really doing is saying, okay, who do you think we're going to give this to, or who in your building do you think, or we got to go find somebody. And then you're working with that person to
Yes,
receive more than me to push it out.
exactly.
Got it.
And the
Got
reason
it.
for that is um, my experience tells me that coaching younger people is a lot easier than coaching older people. If you've ever coached,
Yes.
like they say in high school, I mean, what do they say? But if you're coaching high school kids or college kids, like they're so much more hungry and coachable. Sometimes when they get to the pros, they get an arrogance, they get an attitude, they
Mhm.
get paid tons of money. And, you know, it's really difficult to coach baby boomers. Those would be people my age and even younger, because you get pretty set in your ways. I mean, I found that after about 45 years old, I became less and less coachable. I
Right.
had my ways of doing things. So I will spend time with an aging, an elder, let's call them a baby boomer because they typically are.
Okay.
And I will talk to them about, so let's talk about what your exit planning options are. And typically they're coming to me not because they know me as a coach. So they're typically wanting, like, well, look, I want to grow the business. I want to scale it up. And, I'm trying to figure out, do they still have the hunger?
Right.
Are they humble enough to learn? And, would they make a good, are they smart? Will they learn people, and will they read? Will they study? But I'm looking for, who's that next gen leader, in heir apparent? Is it a family member? Can we, can we level them up? And they might be wondering, look, I've got this son, and I've had a few cases of this currently going on where, look, I've got my son, but I'm just not sure that he's capable. Could you work with him and me to figure out what he needs to learn? And so my job, I think, is to coach that person up and have them start proving to the leader, the founder, the owner, typically, that they're capable. And it takes a lot of proof, and they need someone who's, I think, an outside validator, because
Yes.
you're never going to measure up to your father's like expectations, because he'll keep raising the bar in a lot of cases.
Well, it could be that they're raising the bar, or I find this when I go in and consult and train, it's just, we all get used to people's habits. So we could sit there and say, oh, well, Jonathan always does that. And we ignore that, where someone from the outside is going, why are they doing that? And you go, oh, that's just him, or that's just her, or you stop really seeing. So I think that's a really smart aspect. So those folks, if you're thinking about this, again, getting someone from the outside to be able to come in and be a clear set of eyes, you may not see the strengths or the weaknesses in that person because you've been around them. You stop seeing it. So I think that's a really great starting point, to have you come in and say, can they do it or not? Or do they have the potential to do this?
Yeah. And so here's where it gets a little tricky. And so especially, I think, in the automotive industry, I had a family member who had a large dealership on the East Coast. I've been around it. I've seen it. Oftentimes there might be 2 or 3 children,
Right.
boys, girls, men, women, whatever, that are in the business. So now the succession planning outside expert has to do some kind of evaluation of who is the most qualified, who will get the most, gain the most respect, like, and who would be the ideal person in that new leadership position. And this assumes there's a CEO, CFO, COO, kind of a typical organizational structure. I'm not a big fan or believer that more than one person can be in charge, because I think that pushes account when you have 2 people or 3, playing accountability. Anyone who's a parent and has raised a child with a spouse knows that a smart child wanting to drive a wedge between the parents will, if he doesn't get the answer from daddy, goes to mom, or
Mommy,
vice
daddy.
versa.
But to your point, in your book, which I thought, right out of the gate, one of the things that stuck with me was that idea of, in your example, let's say there's 3 siblings, and you think person A is the one who has the best tools to develop to be successful. What I loved about it was, the question is, are the other 2 going to be okay with that?
Right.
Like that, to me, it almost, people would almost assume, oh yeah, they'll be fine because they're going to be making money too. Not necessarily. So could you dive in a little bit to that? Because I think that's an easy one for people to gloss over.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that the leader, the founder, the person who is transferring the control has that conversation with the children. And I think that the role that a coach like myself can play is to help that person to construct the conversation that he's going to have with his children, so that it's organized. First of all, is it a one-on-one situation? Is Is it in a family ownership or board level type of meeting? I mean, um, I think it's really important that it come from that person as opposed to it come from a consultant or an outsider
Yes.
who looks like, you know, we're distrusted at that point if we're having to deliver that message.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That almost can be construed of times where, someone passes and you're talking about the will. It's like, well, the will was written and it doesn't matter anymore. But in this situation, having a board, having a group of people or sitting around and having that owner lead that conversation, it's important. But again, I think it's very easy when people listen to this, and I try to do what I call them little rest stops to make sure we don't skip over something. It's that. So for anyone who's listening, you're going to have these conversations, having someone walk you through how to have that conversation, right? So what you had said was coaching them to have the conversation, the right word tracks, the reasons, loading their lips also with what you saw as reasons why this person is capable, could be capable, can be coachable versus the other people. I think that's important as well, because if not, then it can get tied into emotions, and old family habits could be brought up of you always like them better, blah, 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 versus no, this is, here's facts. Like, don't skip over the facts.
Yeah, and so let's talk about this, because I think this is applicable to any business in any kind of succession transfer or in any kind of hiring situation.
Right.
Which is that you have to have an objective and somewhat analytical process for creating a job scorecard, if you will. It's basically a job description, but it has key performance indicators maybe baked into it. It's not, loosey kind of like flowy words. It's really specifically, this will be accomplished. This can be, what are the metrics? What are the priorities?
Right.
And you evaluate the candidates, be it the 3 children in this story that we're telling, or other candidates, and who is most likely to achieve that.
Right.
And you do it in a way that it's not singularly done by a consultant, a coach, an owner, a founder, that maybe there's other people that are baked into this process. There's going to be a 3-person interview. And so we're going to try and eliminate as much bias as we can, as much emotion, so that it is really factually based, like who is most likely to get an A on this scorecard in terms of these deliverables.
No, and I think that as a manager, I've shared this story before. One of the biggest lessons I learned years ago, I was running a team of sales, and one person on the team, we just did not connect. Like, we just would butt heads. They were very good at what they did, but we butted heads. And so when the regional manager came in, it was time to do performance reviews and decide if somebody was going to get a raise. And I was adamant, this person should not get a raise. No way. And I watched him look at me, and he had a smile, and he covered the person's name. And as soon as he did that, I knew where he was going. And he said, based on these numbers, should this individual get a raise? And begrudgingly, I had to say yes. And he goes, great, give them a raise. Took his hand off, and I saw the person's name, and I was like, yeah, but you don't understand. And he said, hold them accountable to those other things. But in this case, they deserve it. And it always stuck with me. So same thing here. If you're having that conversation, covering the names and saying, here's someone who scored this, 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 this. Do we all think that this is the person based on, here's the other scores, this is the person that should lead? Yes, when you take that person, uncover that name, it shouldn't matter anymore.
Well, I think that's a great point. Let me add to it, because I think that's only looking at one axis or one dimension of performance, which is the quantity, or what were the metrics that they hit. There's also certain qualitative factors that I think need to be put in, taken right out of GE, which developed the top grading system. The father and son, Todd Smart and Brad Smart, or Jeff Smart rather, and Brad Smart, developed top grading and included values, core values, So we can't ignore that, because if someone is hitting all their numbers, but they don't live the core values, then
Right.
like they could be the superstar that, you know,
Yes, is
you know,
completely disruptive to the team. Absolutely.
100%. And
Absolutely.
so that I think needs to be looked at. I really like Pat Lencioni's ideal team player, where he talks
Yes.
about people who are humble, hungry, and smart.
Yes.
I think evaluating people along some humility axis, smart meaning people smart, hunger meaning like a desire to grow, whether that's through disruption or through process innovation or improvements. So all of that has to be looked at, and those are, I think, qualitative measures.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and then you'd have to look also at like leadership measures, whether whatever um, tool you're using to benchmark someone against, but does this person show that they have the capacity and that they have the understanding and then the desire to
Right.
basically live as a leader, whether it's level 3, 4, or 5, using Jim Collins' level 5 leadership
Mhm.
concepts. Do they embrace this? So there's many dimensions. So you might not have been wrong in saying, this person shouldn't even be here, because they could have been disruptive to the
Well, but
business.
that's what he was saying. And to that point, and I agree, because we would look at all of those. He was saying, well, then hold them accountable to that matrix, right? So
Right.
if their values are off because they're not showing up on time or they're causing commotion and they're doing that, he's like, but this line of metrics, they performed well.
Yes.
Now go over to this line of metrics and
Right.
hold them accountable accordingly. And I said, okay, because then it made sense. Like you were saying, don't just focus on one and throw everything out. You
Yep.
have all these different levels, but don't confuse them. And I think that was his point of
Yep.
don't mix them up. It's not a soup, because then you can target to be able to, one, if you're going to coach them, you can say, you're great over here. Here's where we need work. And
Yeah.
here's where you
And
have to develop.
and so just a brief little plug, I would encourage people to go to the website for my book and download the tools, one of which is a people evaluator tool. And it is basically the 2x2 GE matrix that was developed by Brad Smart and Jeff Smart, and where you evaluate people on their productivity, which is the metrics, and
Yep.
quantitative measures, and you evaluate them qualitatively on the core values. And then you see, like, is this an A player? Is this a B, C player that doesn't live the values, but they're great, highly productive, and we should either warn or coach or,
Right. Exactly.
so, yeah. And then come up with like a personal improvement plan, or whatever you want to call that. Some people, a personal development plan, whatever you feel is positive and encouraging, so that they can improve.
Exactly. And we'll link up the website in the show
Yes.
notes as well. So let's pivot and evolve this.
Sure.
Now, when you're coming in, that now here's someone who's saying, yeah, I think I want to do this. What are some of the pushbacks on having you there, or in these situations? Sometimes I can't imagine they all go perfectly, or you're pushing on things or asking questions or trying to help them along the way, and there's some either indecision, or I don't want to say distrust or regret. Or talk to me about things that happen in terms of hesitancy, and then how you help them through this.
Yeah, good questions. Really good questions. So I think back to a client who was in the logistics space and brought me in. We formed a really nice personal connection, and I met with him maybe, I think, every week. He really wanted me to work with his son and coach his son up. And honestly, I think his son was fairly coachable. Um, but he just was so bogged down in the day-to-day work that it was really hard for him to work on the business, because he was so busy working in the business.
Yeah.
And so it was really difficult to get some traction with him. And the dad really enjoyed our time together and really enjoyed spending that time with me. The son was usually like so busy that it was hard to get him to focus in or to get stuff done in between our meetings. So that was definitely, a resistance point, a pushback. And I think that,
But was that a conscious pushback from the son, or was it
no,
just, I'm so swamped? And in that situation, how did you resolve it? And were things taken off his plate so he could do this, or it just didn't work?
we worked to resolve it.
Right.
But it was a slow transition.
Hmm.
And I was in there for a lot longer than I probably should have been. And we didn't make as much progress. And so I think ultimately that might have caused me to leave, because they were just paying, the value wasn't there from the coaching, because
Right.
they couldn't make the improvements fast enough. And
Right.
I blame this on the size of their company, and some of the fact that this was a difficult industry to staff.
Hmm.
It was not high paying jobs. They had a lot of absenteeism of people out in the warehouse, and managers. And so
So
it
almost
was
they didn't have the luxury to be able to offload some of that work from the
right.
son.
Right.
It
And
makes
they
sense.
didn't have the cash flow
Right.
to be able to bring new people in. So it was a slow build. I think that when the wind is at our back in businesses, and companies are growing, um, you can make a multitude of errors and mistakes,
Sure.
and recover from them, because you keep growing, and grow forward. And so that is always a much easier situation for me as a coach to come into than a company that's kind of stuck or plateaued in terms of sales. There's only so much leverage you can get out of people's time,
Right.
to get the needle to move.
So on that, so let me, because this was
Yeah.
another thing about your book, was this idea of qualifying, right?
Hmm.
So when you're qualifying someone to work, so in that situation where you come in and you're starting to help, like, and you see that, like you said, they're stuck. They have limited resources or limited thinking, or a variety of issues where progress is just not moving fast enough. Um, is there a time where you just have that conversation and say, this is not working for both of us, and we leave?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There is. And I always try and give the benefit of the doubt.
mhm.
Uh, Oftentimes someone who's paying me, like, if they think it's working, then I shouldn't be too quick to judge that it's not working. Certainly, if I'm not feeling energized or excited, or like I'm making a difference, then I
Right.
need to be honest with myself and have that conversation with them. I don't need to tell them that the assignment is boring, but I need to tell them I don't feel like we're making such good progress, and I'm not sure whether they're getting a good return on their investment, or
Right.
whether I should stay around. And certainly if someone isn't showing up or is missing meetings, or,
Yeah,
then we
that,
have that conversation, of course.
yeah.
But, um, but, I've worked mostly in family businesses the
Mhm.
last 10 years. Probably 60, 70% of them are family businesses, and family dynamics are complex. And
I just, so for transparency, I work with my brother. I worked with my other brother at a different job, but my brother and I have been working together for 10 years or
mm,
plus, maybe 11 or 12 now. And so, yes, family dynamics, because you have that just knowledge of each other, intimate knowledge of years and years and years and years and years, but also other dynamics do come into play.
yeah. And so I think you have to be somewhat more sensitive in those situations to
Hmm.
the dynamics at play, and know that if you're going to make any extreme recommendations, um, you might be out of there before any of those recommendations are implemented, right?
Yeah.
So like firing a brother or having a really difficult conversation. Um, but I think I want to get back to your question about, like, some of the challenges and
Sure.
the resistance. And I just got off a call a few minutes ago with someone I've been coaching, and they've taken over the business from the dad,
Hmm.
and they've grown the business significantly, and they've put all sorts of processes that didn't exist before, and there's a lot more accountability, and the dad has been marginalized, if you will, moved into a position where, less authority. I mean,
Hmm.
he's still the owner, he's still got sort of his name on the door, if you
Hmm.
will, but he comes to meetings and isn't as accountable as the son would like the rest of the people in the meeting to be. And so it sets a very bad example, and it's very difficult because I coached him and said, look, the likelihood of your dad changing at this age are like very slim. So you have to work around him, and you have to work with him or through him. And so find out what he really loves to do, put him more in charge of that, help him to understand that he's destroying or damaging the culture, where they're trying to build accountability into the culture, where hunger is one of their important things that they're striving.
Right.
He's not striving so much anymore, and there's nothing wrong with that. Understand it, but put him in a different seat, in
Right.
the company. And these are difficult conversations that, for children to have with their parents. These are difficult conversations to have.
Yeah. That's a very hard conversation to have. I think that what you just said is a very uh, very, very important point to not disrespect their what they've given to the company, not to try and change them because you won't,
Right.
but to find another focus point for their passion. And maybe you could say, instead of you worrying about this or sitting in this meeting because I see that you're frustrated with all of this. Let's put you over here or put you in charge of that, where all of a sudden they feel useful. The worst thing that you could do is make somebody feel that they're not useful anymore. My
Right.
grandfather used to always say, I need a reason to get up every morning. So
Correct.
whether it's at that table making these big decisions, or maybe he comes in at the end of it after you've done some of the accountability measures and you're talking at a very high level, or whatever, to your point, is thinking strategically where you're not discounting them because you still want to have their counsel, but they may not need to be in those meetings where more minutia is involved because they are just bogging it down. And then you
Yep.
just have to pull that trigger and reschedule the meeting to something else, or say, hey, you know what, dad, you don't, or mom, you don't need to be in this meeting. I need you in this meeting.
Right.
And then again, it's value add. So I really like that.
Yeah, and I think, to steal a phrase from Chip Conley, who is a very successful hotelier, built a boutique brand, exited, and then became kind of this guru who walked around the floors of Airbnb's, leadership team, and was this modern elder who is
Mhm.
basically a wise, the wise older man. He's not an
Right.
old man, but compared to the Airbnb founders,
Sure.
he's, older significantly. And I think that part of the succession planning assignment and work is this identification of knowledge that needs to be transferred, and some kind of a plan, whether it's a learning or training or development plan around the transfer of that knowledge. And it may not come directly from the person who has that knowledge. It could come from, hey, you need to read this book, or hey, you need to get this certification, or
Right.
you need to go study work with this coach. Um, but that's super important. And the role that this elder wise person, modern elder, can play is that of transferring knowledge throughout the organization, you
Sure.
know,
I
especially technical knowledge, because the processes have probably been changed. Computers, software, SaaS type programs, they're probably not as good with any of that kind of stuff if they're older, but they
Right.
do have knowledge that, the lost craft, that is lost in, whether it's marketing or, manufacturing, or, I mean, I've seen it in the machine shop industry where guys know how to run computer numerical control machines, but they don't understand the concepts of how to basically craft something.
Right.
And so that those craftsman level skills are still valuable, and the history of the organization
Right.
are
As
really
well as the
valuable.
people skills, because a lot of times if it's a services business or it's a, a family business, a lot of it is customer facing, where we could have all the technology we want and I can run this machine, but it's this understanding why you're doing it. How does this impact? And just reminding people the people business. My grandfather had a music store, and he always talked about being out and shaking hands. And the reason why it was so big in New Jersey was people would come for, miles and miles and miles away because of he would take time with them. And you could have all the knowledge you want, but to be able to impart that, even if it's storytelling and just giving them examples, I think to your point is we sometimes look at older people as they transition up, our parents or whatever in a family business is, to your point, we focus so much on the technical. Well, they can't do this. And we discount all the things that they did to build this business in the beginning, and what their strategies were, or what their struggles were, or how they thought through problems. I think that is such a wealth of knowledge, where it's easy to discount it as not valuable anymore, when in reality, you have someone who's built the business and went through all these struggles. They may not be exactly it, but if you parse it out, I'll guarantee you there's a common thread or a thought process that could probably benefit what you're struggling with right now as the leader.
And they probably don't fit in any there. It's like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. Like, they don't fit conventionally on the organization chart. There's not a clear accountability position that they fit into.
Right.
But they're like the history of the organization. And
See, I
there's
like that
no,
where it's the elder statesman type of
yeah,
a
yeah,
thing, where you don't really have a title, but you're here. And even if it's they come in for a couple hours a day, because again, it's remembering they feel valuable, they get dressed, they have a reason to go. And even if it's walking around and spending time and shaking hands and saying hello or whatever it
that's
is,
exactly what it is. Yep.
it's so important to be that glue. And it's actually very important for the staff, because you said that person is the walking history of
Yep.
the company. And it just solidifies also that value, and it gives people who are working there a sense of, we're part of something that's legacy building, meaning that it's been around for a while and there's a reason why. It's a sense of pride if you allow it to be, by showcasing that, versus we put dad away and he doesn't
Right.
come anymore.
Right.
That type of.
Yeah,
Let me just.
it is healthy when the grandpa or dad recognizes that, hey, look, I realize I don't serve that much of a purpose here anymore. I do love coming to work. I do love having my office. And I probably, I need to spend more time with your mom, or I need to
Right,
probably travel, or I need to get out a little bit. And,
right.
I mean, it's okay for the next generation leader to encourage them to step out of their comfort zone and explore and adventure in the world a little bit more.
Yeah,
So,
it's tough. It's also understanding. So if you're listening to this and you are in that position where you are taking over for that, it is understanding that the person who's letting go, there is that withdrawal.
yes,
They go through a withdrawal of, I'm not needed anymore, or I'm not having an impact. So again, and I love that, John, that is redirecting their focus to another purpose where they can go work. I know when my father retired, they moved to one of those 55 and older communities, golfing, golf on a golf course. And one of the things that my mother encouraged him, because he was a little lost and he had been working with my brother's company as that elder statesman. Just, he didn't come up in the company, it was my brother's company, but he helped him just from a older viewpoint. but he started going to run the men's golf club lunch, the men's club lunch. And that gave him a purpose to go. And so, like you said, it's my mother sort of just took his head and turned it and said, focus over there and use your organization skills over there. And it became exciting for him. And it was a sense of pride. So again, helping them in that transition is really important as well. I think that's a great.
So important. Exactly.
So one last topic before we start to wrap up. I could chat with you. This is phenomenal. How, just in a few minutes that we have left, if someone, how does somebody, like you were talking about, understanding when you're taking on a client? Because I think that was important, and I don't think we spent enough time on that. You selecting and knowing when it's not right. How would you advise somebody to utilize that skill in hiring employees? Like, understanding the culture when we're hiring, because again, we have a tendency where sometimes, I just need people and I'm hiring people and we'll worry about that later. Like, is that a filter that you talk about when you're telling somebody to scale their business, to make sure that they're hiring correctly?
Yeah. So I'm a really big believer that great companies are built by great people who who share the values and can be highly productive. And so I try and help people to avoid hiring the superstar that doesn't fit with your core values. I think it's really important. I call it the Barry Bonds syndrome, where you've got like an amazing player, but he doesn't get along well with anyone else, and he's not a mentor, he's not humble. It's kind of me. So I think it's really important that in the hiring process, you are clear on what are those values that you want people to live and die by. And they do this very well, by the way, in the military, right? They make it very clear what those values are. They're very, and then like you either fit and you're part of and you fit into the military, or you don't. And so you work hard to weed those people out as early on in the hiring process as possible. And that's why the adage I still like is hire slow, fire fast. I know Gary V put a spin on it, which was hire fast, fire faster. And I guess in a high growth, really rapid scale up, you need to do that, but you need to make swift decisions in that regard. And so super important that you are being clear that there's these two dimensions, and that hire according to a scorecard to keep yourself and the people who are doing the hiring honest. And when I say honest, I mean you don't want to get like people have the halo effect. They were the last one in and you like them out of the 10 people you interviewed. So you remember them the best. You forget the people in the middle. You remember the first and the last. I mean, if you have a scorecard and a disciplined approach to hiring, perhaps using a tandem interview approach where one person's doing the questioning, the other person's taking the notes, and doing it against a scorecard. And then I like what I call a 3x3x3, which is at least three different interviews, three different times and places or situations, and by three different hiring individuals. And then comparing notes in between. I think developing more of a process, almost every company that I talk to, Glenn, could do a better job of having a more developed process around hiring. They don't put enough of an emphasis on it. They hire too quickly off of a resume or off of a first impression, and I think you can make a lot of mistakes.
Do you think it's because companies wait too long to hire, meaning that they wait till it's necessary versus you use the early on in our conversation where you say a company is going to buy another company because they want their bench, right? They're going to buy the bench. So do you think that companies just are in a mode of, I need it now, instead of reverse engineering how long it takes to find someone, how long it takes to train to get someone up? So if I'm projecting out, sales are going to escalate, right? So you come into my company and you start hitting the gas and we're selling. I mean, I know I have it where I know when it's projected out X number of revenue is going to come in. Well, that's going to need X number of things. Well, we need to make sure that we have people in here 2 months before or start to search 2 months versus I need them yesterday. Is that something that
Well,
you see
I
where it's a
think there's
panic?
I think there is some element of that. And I think the entrepreneur who has the mindset that embraces planning
Mhm.
and, thoughtful analytical preparation, um, then they probably fare better in hiring people in advance of knowing they're going to be a need, as opposed to more reactive type of hiring. So I'm sure there's those situations where they're just scrambling. I think most times they're just not planning enough and
Right,
they're hiring and it's behind the eight ball. So, with most of my clients, and most of them are small, medium size, they're putting the job description at the same time that they're already like interviewing people, at the same
right.
time that they're, wanting to make an offer. I mean, I've had some clients come to me and said, I made the offer and now I have to put together the job description and, a scorecard. I'm like, you got it all backwards.
Right, you
It's
got it
like,
backwards.
that's not
Yeah.
how it works. So that I think is the big challenge, is
Yeah, I agree. And I
preparing.
think I think it's that. I think we took a very long time to continue to calibrate our hiring to almost what you were talking about in your 3x3.
Mhm.
And we have that now benchmark, but in the early stages it was a lot of balancing. Well, we have a need, the sales are coming, but I don't really have enough to hire another person. Well, I'm going to wait, and then all of a sudden the sales are there, and then you're overloading your staff. And so I've been behind the eight ball, so I know exactly why. At one time I was just thinking, is it only me or other people? But what you're
Yeah.
saying is there's a lot of people out there that are
Yeah,
paying
because,
attention.
in the earlier or entrepreneurial stage of a business, there's a lot of things that are flying at you, and
Right.
it's difficult to prioritize those. And a lot of people are flying by the seat of their pants,
Right. And
so they
sometimes
don't.
entrepreneurial people, the people
They
who
hate planning.
are, well, they're not there. I know for my brother and I, what works very well is he is more the idea, I can see it, let's go. And I'm
Right.
more of the number two builder.
Right.
Right. So he's helped me become more I can see, and I've slowed him down to go, we got to build.
Yep.
I think sometimes the entrepreneurs are more of that visionary, and they just think, well, we'll just make it happen, or we'll work on it. It'll happen. We'll figure it out as we go along. And you're going, well, we're making mistakes. And you're right. In the early stages, a lot of it is those one or two or three people that are drinking that Kool-Aid, and we're all going to go and we'll work forever and we'll just get it done. That's not scalable. And that's where then processes and hiring correctly and accountability and measurement and all of that has to be in place to build that structure where then you can build on, or else it just all crumbles.
Yeah. Now, I imagine in more well-established businesses like automotive retailers, they're much more planned about this. I would imagine, they have a pretty good idea about how many salespeople they need for the floor. No? Okay. So,
I'll go to
uh,
every one of them and they'll say, we need to hire people. But then again, when you ask them about their hiring processes, to your point, you have some that are very rigid in saying, no, this is my culture and this is what I want, and I'm going to hire people. Or even if they were experienced, they're going to say, well, here's how we do it here, and put you through the
right.
paces. Some people have gone the opposite and say, I don't want to hire anyone who has experience. I'll train them my way because I have to break their habits. And then other people just go, well, tell me about yourself. And they'll say, well, I sold X down the street. And they're like, great,
You're
come
hired.
aboard. You're hired. And then they're putting out fires a couple
Yeah.
months, or they're
Yeah.
dealing with the patchwork of culture. But sometimes that chaos, they just assume that's the way it always was because it's sort of always been that way, instead of saying to themselves, but why? Why can't it be more organized? Why does this have to be chaotic? Why do I have to spend half of my time putting out fires, and this person's mad at that person because that person doesn't do it, but you're yelling at me for doing it? Like it can be very chaotic.
Well, I think, and entrepreneurs need to understand, if they're going to build a valuable business that is scalable,
Yes.
that they need to develop processes that are standard across different departments, and they need to remove themselves from just using their intuition or their instinct, because then everything's going to rely on their intuition and their instinct, you
Right.
know,
Then
you
you
know,
create dependency and then you
com-
can't scale.
and right. And then you can't sell or exit. So,
Exactly. Because then they're going to say, well, if you leave, the business crumbles, and that's not, you have to be able to prove that this runs without you because I've actually built a business. It's not me.
yep,
We're
exactly.
wearing the business like a coat.
Exactly.
So great. This has been phenomenal. I really appreciate it. This has been great. So at the end of every episode, we just do a couple quick, what I call rapid fire behind the mic, and it's
Sure.
great thing about this. So whatever answer pops into your head, just go ahead and let me know. So you look, from doing all the research I've seen the pictures, you look like you're in good shape and everything else like that. Tell me what's one thing that you love to eat that you would consider that's my cheat meal.
Oh boy. Well, uh, I don't know. The last meal I had was a seafood meal that was really good. It was shellfish.
Okay.
And my doctor says, with your cholesterol family history, you really should avoid
Okay.
shellfish.
Okay. So
But
we
it
won't tell your doctor.
feels so good.
Well, I know. We won't tell him.
Exactly.
What's one place that you have not traveled to that's on your list of places to go to?
Ooh. Well, I'd really like to go to Australia. It's been on my list for a long time. And I also have a particular interest in a town called San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, where I know a lot of expats are moving to. So those are two places.
There you go. What was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Oh my gosh. That would be hard to say, but a great answer would be Bugs Bunny, because the genius of Warner Brothers was amazing.
What's a movie or a TV show that when it pops on TV and you run across it, you have to stop and watch it for a little while?
Oh gosh. This is a controversial one. I'm going to say Woody Allen, because I grew up on his humor.
Sure.
He's not so funny, and he's not so well revered today.
Right.
But there are some things from back then that just made me laugh so hard. So,
what is a book that you're reading or something you're listening to that's inspiring you that you would like to share with other people?
Wow. Well, I would have to say that, to be honest, I skim a lot of business books these days. And so there isn't anything that's jumping out at me. As you'll see on my bookshelf, I have the Traction, EOS, Rocket Fuel books, and those are like good reference manuals for me with my clients.
Great.
So
good. No, I'm constantly putting together a list and saying, here's what all my guests are recommending. There's two more. One is, if I took your close family friends and asked them to describe you in one word, what would it be?
Persistence.
Yep. I can see that. Okay. Last question. We've talked about a lot of things here, a lot of great information. I'm sure people are going to hopefully listen to this a couple times, because I know I am. If there was one thing that you hope the audience, the person who's listening, is the one thing that you would say, if you walk away with anything, this is it, what would it be?
I don't know. The word that popped into my head was empathy. I think that if you're going to be a successful leader, Glenn, you have to have enormous empathy as a leader to be, it's part of humility. It's part of earning respect from other people. Also, if you're going to be taking over as a next gen leader in a family business, you have to have empathy for the parent who is letting go, transitioning, or if you're the parent, maybe a baby boomer who's looking at your next gen leader in your family, or a successor, you have to have empathy, like that they're going to do it differently. And you have to care to understand how they would approach things. So, it's the old expression, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
Empathy is really an underappreciated value, I think.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's so important, to be able to And I love that you clarified both sides. It's not
Mm.
just for the person who's leaving or handing off, it's the person who's receiving, and both sides need to have empathy. So that's phenomenal. So again, I appreciate your time. This has been great. So how can people get in touch with you to, one, connect with you online, but more importantly, learn about what you do and connect with you there? I know we'll put the website, but please share out how they can connect with you.
Okay, so an easy way is to go to LinkedIn,
Mhm.
Jonathan Goldhill. You'll find me there. I have two websites, one for my coaching business, which is thegoldhillgroup.com. My book is at disruptivesuccessor.com, and you can download a chapter there. Either of those sites will connect you to me, and you can email me at Jon, at thegoldhillgroup.com. But check out the websites first, connect with me on LinkedIn. That way I know know a little bit about who I am, and I'll be able to understand better what your needs are.
Yeah, I love your websites, by the way. They're really well done. And
Thank you.
like I said, I'm waiting to get the book. I read I downloaded the chapter, and I just can't wait. It's really worthwhile, folks. You should read it. And again, even outside of just the thought of saying, well, I'm not ready to sell my business or hand it off. There's so much about leadership there and just approaching, your business, very, very worthwhile. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
So
it's a scale up roadmap
yeah.
for aspiring entrepreneurs who want to grow a business.
I can't wait to read the whole thing. So again,
Great.
Jonathan, thank you
Thanks,
so
bud.
much. Everyone, please, again, as I say at the end of every episode, I appreciate everything. Don't forget to subscribe. You can subscribe on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can watch the full episode on the YouTube channel. Please share it out. I'm sure there's a lot of people who could benefit from what Jonathan and I were talking about. It means the world to me that you're here. As I say at the end of every episode, you're in charge. But Jonathan just gave you a few more tools to help you become more successful, both professionally and personally. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you at the next episode.